Start recording first, then share this screen. Oh, whoops. Share. Look at this. This is going to work. We're going to work. This is going to work again. Hot dog. Okay. Class started? Are we good? Yeah. All right. So we were talking about public opinion yesterday, talking about various ways to sort of influence public opinion, how we obtain our public opinion. Political leaders can influence public opinion significantly. And what we mean by that is, one, I need you to understand that when we say that they influence public opinion, that doesn't just mean that they tell you how to think about something, because a lot of the times we already have our minds made up about how we think about a topic. And so instead, oh, that's going to be interesting. I don't know how to get that back. Okay. I don't know how to let people back into the, like. Well, no, now. Oh, hold on, wait, maybe that'll work. Okay, because there's only 2 people from online that are in this. And so I just need to make sure that if other people are waiting, I can let them in. Okay, I think I figured that out. All right, so they don't necessarily tell you how to feel about something, but one of the things that they can do is they can change sort of the level of importance for an issue, right? So for instance, if you look at like Donald Trump, right, on the campaign trail in 2016, one of the things Donald Trump talked about a great deal was immigration in this country, right? For a lot of us, immigration was not something that we ever thought about. Like it didn't affect us. We didn't really care. Like it wasn't, I mean, unless you are yourself an immigrant, which in case maybe it does affect you, right? But for the most part, Americans, those people who had been here for a significant period of time, didn't think much about immigration one way or the other. Once Donald Trump starts talking about it, now immigration becomes a more important issue, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you're like, oh, Donald Trump is the president, and he said that immigrants are bad people, and so that's how I feel. No, I don't mean that he changes your opinion about immigrants necessarily, but he might shift your view as to how important immigration is as an issue within America, right? The bully pulpit is a concept, and it's really specific to the president, but it's a concept in government where, first of all, you know what a pulpit is? Kaylee, what's a pulpit? You don't know what a pulpit is? Man, y'all need Jesus.
Is it like that orange stuff, that orange juice?
No, that's pulp. That's pulp. There's no it to that. No, y'all need Jesus. A pulpit is what a preacher stands behind.
You mean a podium?
Yes, it's another word for a podium, basically. But a pulpit is specific to religion. Pulpit? P-U-L-P-I-T. It's on the PowerPoint. Right there. Bully pulpit. Okay? So I'm now going to make the assumption that y'all don't go to church.
I do.
In which case, y'all probably don't, well, maybe you go to church. You might not go to the type of church that has a pulpit, right? And stereotyping, I'm grossly stereotyping now. Stereotypically, pulpits are like Southern Baptist churches where like an old guy sits there and basically talks about like fire and brimstone and you're going to burn in eternal damnation. Like that kind of preacher. Y'all know what I'm talking about? No, you looking at the wrong thing, girl.
I looked at pulpit.
I'll take care of that. We'll deal with that later. Okay. But so the pulpit is basically it's a podium. You stand behind it. The bully pulpit is the concept of the president basically dictating to you and almost bullying you. Now, some presidents are a little bit better at bullying than other presidents. And when we say bullying, I don't know, well, on some level, it's actually similar to what you think of when you think of the word bullying. On some level, it's not what you think of when you think of the word bullying. But But it is sort of the president being very forceful. Yeah, that's the little pulpit with the microphone and the cross on the front. That's a,
I didn't know that was a name.
yeah, that is. Don't worry about it. Okay, but when we say bully, like it's the president being sort of forceful and trying to tell you how to feel about things or how to try to tell you what issues are or are not important in American culture, right? The media can sort of do the same thing in terms of how important an issue is, right? Like if you watch on the news, I mean, for instance, like you watch on the news today about, all of the civil unrest and Black Lives Matter and all the protests that are going on in all these various cities, right? And now all of a sudden you might be like, man, like racial inequality is a problem in the United States. I hate to be the one to tell you this. Racial inequality is no worse today than it was 2 years ago, right? But we just didn't have as many protests and it didn't show up on the news as much. And so you didn't think of it as being as important as it is today because it shows up so much. But it doesn't necessarily change your opinion of it, right? If you think that Black Lives Matter is like a terrorist organization, the fact that it shows up all the time doesn't change your opinion as to the organization. It simply like tells you that we need to do more to stop them, right? Because that's what you think, okay? Just how important the issue is. Okay, we got that one. Interest groups can help shape public opinion. We'll talk about, there's a whole unit, a whole chapter on interest groups. But basically, interest groups just exist. They sort of are a collective of people, because that's the definition of a group, who share a common interest, which is how they get the name interest group. And they're trying to basically convince people that how they feel is how everybody should feel. Right, like so the NRA, for instance, they try to convince everybody that everybody needs to own guns. Right. Some interest groups are more successful than others. It really depends on like the interest group themselves, and we'll go over this in far more detail when we go over interest groups themselves. Wait, okay, you're on the right slide now. Media, I talked about this a second ago. So media can frame how we feel about things, right? Or how important we think an issue is. But for the most part, they're not really changing your opinion because you're watching media that coincides with what you already believe. Media can be beneficial specifically for politicians. Politicians will try to use the media in order to further their sort of ideals and their beliefs. If you were to watch CNN, for instance, literally turn on CNN some morning while you're getting ready for school, and if you watch 30 minutes of CNN, I promise you some politician is going to be on there, right? Like inevitably they'll interview some politician so that he can espouse his views about some concept. Right? I'll let you go through the cartoons on your own, but if you don't know Calvin and Hobbes, that's actually a fairly good cartoon for you to look at. Right? Government responsiveness to public opinion. Sometimes public opinion can change government responsiveness, but that's not always true. The vast majority of Americans believe that the government should balance the budget every year, yet it never happens. So there are instances in which public opinion does shift governmental response. Gay marriage is a really good example of that. You go back 20 years ago, the public was not in favor of gay marriage. The government did not support gay marriage. Now, the vast majority of the public is in favor of gay marriage, and so the government has shifted its position as well. All right. Does everybody's opinion count equally? That's a hard no. And it's a hard no for a couple of reasons. One, when we talked yesterday about equality, right? Yes, everybody can have an opinion, but the government is not responsive to everybody's opinion in the same manner. If you are one of the sort of elites, if you are somebody that has a significant amount of economic resources, the government's going to be more responsive to you because you're probably giving money to politicians to get them reelected, and so they care about your opinion more so than they do about other people's. So for the most part, the impact of your opinion is really based, one, on sort of your economic status, but economic status can actually be overcome if you have sort of a collective opinion. So if you get a large enough group, then that group can be wealthy because it's the accumulation of all of your individual small wealth. And so that can actually create some governmental response as well. Measuring public opinion. So this is sort of what your discussion board on Monday is asking you to think about. We measure first of all, measuring public opinion is scientific. What's up? Yes, I'll explain that later. Okay, let me try to get through this today. Public opinion polls are scientific, meaning if you understand science, right? Science, anytime you talk about something being scientific, that means that you have a study or an experiment that can, if it's valid, if it's good, it can be replicated. So theoretically, public opinion polls, right? If Diego makes his little public opinion poll and then he goes around and asks everybody at George Ranch High School how they feel about something, and he comes back and compiles his results, and he's like, oh, the seniors think this, right? And then the freshmen think this. Theoretically, I could take his poll and I could go to a different group of people at George Ranch, ask them the same questions, and get the same results that he got if that poll is accurate, right? So accurate public polls can be replicated with a different sample, right? That's sort of what we mean when we say it's scientific, right? And polling helps because it tells people, it tells politicians, it tells the government how to engage on certain things. Donald Trump's actually pretty good at understanding this concept because you know how he has all these nicknames and he makes fun of everybody, right? Like Sleepy Joe, right? Or Basement Joe, right? Crooked Hillary. You know what I'm talking about? No idea? No? Okay, that's sad. Donald Trump makes fun of a lot of people, especially his political adversaries. The reality is he tests those out. He gets public opinion data to figure out whether or not people like those nicknames and whether or not those nicknames are things that will sort of win him support. All right? So public opinion polls are utilized by politicians almost on a daily basis, okay? Your sample size, believe it or not, your sample size for a public opinion poll is relatively small. So a good public opinion poll to cover the entirety of the United States really needs to only be a couple thousand people, right? And the reason is it's something called the margin of diminishing returns. Eventually, if I ask 10 people a question and I get 5 yeses and 5 nos, right, that's 50-50. If I ask another 5 people and they all say yes, now my results are 67 to 33%. Okay, that's a significant difference for asking a very limited number of people a question, right? Once you get into the thousands in participants, you get far less deviation in your responses, right? So if I ask 3,000 people, right, and it doesn't matter what my results are, but if I ask another 50, my results, even if all 50 said the same thing, my results only shift a very, very small amount, right? And getting 50 people to agree on something is highly unlikely. So sample size is a significant factor in public opinion polls. Right? You need a random sample. So a really good example of this is In 1932, Herbert Hoover was running for re-election, and he was up against a man named Franklin Roosevelt, right? Public opinion polls at the time said that Hoover was going to win re-election. Their sample was that they called people on a telephone in 1932 in the middle of the Great Depression. Anybody want to guess who had a telephone then? Just rich people, like really rich people. Like a quarter of the U.S. was unemployed and homeless. Okay, so your random sample is significantly important. One of the ways that they do that now is sort of random phone dialing, because most people have phones, and so they pick like an area code, and then they pick like the first 7 numbers, and then they dial all of the last 2. They pick the first 7 at random, and then they dial all the last 2, and they do that multiple times. Okay. Sampling error, that's a margin of error. It's any decent public opinion poll is going to tell you what their margin of error is. And if their margin of error is more than probably 3%, you need to sort of question the validity of that poll. Smaller public or smaller margins of error are sort of necessary, right? The survey design, the way that you word questions, is wildly important, right? There was a public opinion poll on Lou Dobbs, and if you don't know who Lou Dobbs is, he's a political commentator for Fox News, right? But like, this is an actual journalist, like an actual journalist, not somebody that worked for the Trump campaign, but he had a public opinion poll about a year ago that asked you to rate how Donald Trump was doing as president of the United States. Your options were great, good, or okay. That was it. You understand that that's a flawed poll, right? Because at no point in time could you disagree, could you have a negative opinion of Donald Trump according to that poll, right? So how you word questions, your options, there's all sorts of things that can affect the reliability of a poll that are very significant, and they're important to look at when you're trying to determine the validity of a public opinion poll. For the most part, polls have to be like multiple choice, because if you have open-ended questions, things get very, very ambiguous, and then you're it's hard to lump those answers together in order to determine who is in agreement with whom. All right. I'll let you go through this on your own, but it's looking at some of the stuff that we just talked about. Right. Online surveys, they can be advantageous in the sense that they're easy to do, they're cost effective, they're efficient, you can get large samples relatively quickly. The biggest problem with them, though, is that they're not random. So like, for instance, if you have a Twitter poll, one, you got to understand not everybody on Twitter, but two, the only people that would be exposed to that poll are probably people that already follow you or follow people that follow you on Twitter, right? So for instance, let's just throw out names, like if Don Lemon were to put out a poll, right? Don Lemon is a CNN political commentator, right? He's probably followed predominantly by liberal people because he's a very liberal dude, right? In which case the responses to his poll would skew liberal, all right? So they're definitely not random. Face-to-face interviews are actually wildly advantageous, but they're very, very costly. You can't necessarily guarantee random samples. Sometimes you'll see things like this at like shopping mall. Well, you used to. Shopping malls are going the way of the dodo now. But you used to see there would be instances in which marketers that measure public opinion would have like a little office in a mall, a shopping mall, and they would just pull people randomly and be like, "Hey, we're looking for guys to come and take this poll because we're trying to measure how guys feel about whatever," right? But they're pretty costly. because you have to pay people to conduct the polling, to conduct the interviews. And a lot of times you have to give people some sort of incentive to sit and take the poll, right? Whether it's a couple of bucks or a free meal or whatever. Social desirability and selection bias. One, I've kind of been hinting at this. You sort of need to question the validity of polls because polling in America has become sort of problematic, and it's problematic for a variety of reasons. But desirability is probably a significant aspect of it. And there's an actual psychological term for it. And I forget the name of it, but the idea here is that essentially when somebody asks you a question, there's an underlining sort of response within human nature to try to tell them what you think they want to hear because you want them to look upon you favorably, right? And this is one of those things that you see with Donald Trump sort of significantly. Because Donald Trump, like if you ask people in America, Donald Trump has terrible, terrible numbers, right? In fact, if you looked at the 2016 polling data on whether or not Donald Trump was going to win, I mean, it was supposed to be Clinton in a landslide, right? Like an absolute landslide. I mean, Clinton was going to win. Of the states that Trump won, Clinton was supposed to win Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, North Carolina, all sorts of states. I mean, Clinton was supposed to just completely annihilate Trump. But what we found is that a whole bunch of people lie about how they actually feel about Donald Trump because they're afraid that if you ask them, like, do you like Donald Trump? They're afraid that if they say yes, you're going to be like, oh, you must be racist or you must be a misogynist. And they don't want you to think that about them. So they're like, oh, man, I don't like Donald. Don't like that dude. But then when there's nobody around and they go cast their vote in a private voting booth, they go vote for Trump, right? Bold prediction on my part right here. If you look at polling now, Joe Biden going to win by 10 points. No, he's not. Trump is going to get reelected, right? I would actually be more surprised at this point if Trump is not reelected than I would if Trump were to be reelected. Selection bias is just the idea of not getting that random sample, right? Trying to sometimes it's done with a positive thought process, like you're trying to get minority opinions in there. But the concept of selection bias is basically the interviewers or the people that are conducting the poll sort of dictating who gets to take it. Push polls. Push polls are actually designed to push you into a response, right? So for instance, if I asked you a yes or no question, is Coach Baker a good teacher? Right? You know what the answer to that question is? Because it's a pushed question. The way that question is asked, it pushes you into saying yes. Because yes is the more common response than no, right? It doesn't matter how I ask the question. If I said, is Coach Baker a bad teacher? I'm pushing you to say yes. Right? If I say, is Coach Baker a good teacher? I'm pushing you to say yes. The way it should be asked is, how would you rate Coach Baker as a teacher? Right? And then it could just be good or bad. Right? But now I'm not pushing. So push polls are trying to do that. The bandwagon effect gets back into that desirability concept, right? It's basically just people telling you what they think you want to hear. They're going to go jump with the front runner because they think that that's what everybody else is doing, and so they want to be a part of that. This is just looking at the accuracy of polls, but I mean, if you look at that. The vast majority of polls were very skewed to the left. These are just some of the instances in which polls have failed to predict winners. So Truman in 48, Yeah, 48. Truman was another really good example of that. All the polls said that Truman was going to lose, yet he won. Big data mining is a way of trying to flush out public opinion. Data mining is a relatively new concept because essentially, like, y'all understand just how different sort of the digital age is, like in comparison. Y'all know that like y'all realize that everything you do digitally is mined. Do you know what I mean when I say mined? Y'all have any concept? I mean that people are like digging into it to the point where, I mean, obviously this isn't real, but if you've ever seen what movie was it? Captain America: The Winter Soldier, right? When they were like, we can tell who is gonna, you know, based on like a high school kid's graduation speech, we know whether or not he is going to try to overthrow the government in 20 years. Right? Like, we know how he would vote in 20 years, right? The amount of data that exists on you because you're constantly online. And sometimes it's even just looking, like what you look at online. Believe it or not, Facebook, y'all have, any of you have Facebook? Facebook will tell you whether or not you're liberal or conservative. You know that? Facebook has mined enough data on you because Facebook is one of the ones that's notorious for this. They have mined enough data on you that they can usually accurately predict whether or not you are conservative or liberal. And it's in your profile. If you go and look, Facebook will tell you what you are, which is scary. Okay? But everybody's doing this now. Okay? Because knowledge is power, especially in politics. And so this big data is being used in order to sort of drive political messages and the political agenda, trying to get you to vote for specific candidates. Right? Again, I'm going to let you go through some of these visuals on your own. Right? But usually when we get to this point, we're pretty much at the end. Yeah, I don't care about these. Yeah, I mean, we could go through these if you really wanted to, but a lot of the times I take them out of the PowerPoint. So you've got them in here if you want to look and just sort of see how you feel about these things. You're welcome to. But these are actually like public opinion polls, essentially for you guys, right? Yeah. So that takes us to the end of chapter 6. Right? Any questions? Yes, quiz tonight. Online, y'all have any questions? If I let you in late because I was busy teaching, well, I should probably look at the camera, shouldn't I? If I let you in late because I was busy teaching, I'm going to convert this to a video again, and it'll get posted right under part 1 in D2L, and I'll try to get that done here during lunch, all right? But for those of you online, that's it. If you've got questions about like the discussion board for Monday, you're welcome to stay because I know Kaylee apparently has a question. So if her question helps you, you're welcome to hang on for a minute. What's your question about the discussion board for Monday?
Can you like explain it? Can you explain it to her? Can you explain it like that?
So what I am not asking you to go ask a whole bunch of people questions. What I'm asking you to do, or what I want you to do, is think about the process that somebody would have to go through, right? So really, it's basically today's lecture that you're looking at. How would you measure public opinion, right? And I actually do this in my AP class as well. Like this is it's an assignment that I've frequently given in my AP class, where I make them like create a poll and ask a whole bunch of people at George Ranch, and try to actually like mine the data and figure out how people at George Ranch feel about an issue, right? Because y'all are Lone Star students right now. Instead of it being George Ranch, it's asking you about Lone Star, right? But I don't expect you to go and ask kids because you're not actually on Lone Star's campus, right? What I want you to think about as you're doing it is how do you write questions, right? How do you try to write questions to make sure that those questions aren't leading or biased so you don't have a push-pull, right? So that you're not sort of pigeonholing people into answering a very specific way, okay? Right, so that's sort of the concept of what that discussion board is looking at, okay? Your next discussion board is going to be the one that I'm actually going to get rid of and have you read the article about liberty, okay? So don't go and do the Alabama literacy test discussion board. Not that I don't think that that's important, but to me that's a little bit more of a U.S. history concept, looking at literacy tests and how those played out, than it is sort of current, government voting issues. All right. Anything else? No? All right, wonderful. Y'all have a good day.
Do we have a discussion due today?
No, it's due Monday. Today, so I bumped a couple of things back. So if you had looked like a week ago, there was one due today. I bumped the Chapter 6 reading quiz to tonight. And then the next discussion board is due Monday.
So just ignore the due by 9/11 and it should be due by 9/14.
Did I not? I thought I'd switched it. Hold on. Let me pull this up real quick. Jaden, where were you looking? Is it in
The Lone Star College Sci-Fair Survey Design? Like if you click on it, it says in 200 to 250 words, answer the following by 9/11.
You know what? Okay, so my guess is I changed the due date on the assignment, but I didn't change the date in the assignment itself. Yeah, so if you look at it, it says, so you're right, Jaden. So it says in 250 words, answer by 9/11. But if you look up above, it says due September 14th.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So
Yeah, and that's
you're looking at the 14th as the due date.
and that's with the two responses.
Well, no, we should probably, because the 14th is Monday, right?
Mm-hmm. I think. Yeah.
No, let's move it to the 15th then, so that gives you an extra day
For the responses.
for the responses.
Okay. So 15th.
Yeah, so I'm in there right now manipulating that.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's now been updated, Jaden. Thanks for bringing that to my attention.
Thank
I have a
you.
question.
Hold on, I gotta pull Zoom
Yeah.
back up. What's up, Elijah?
Hey, hi. So I got an 85 on the last discussion. I just wanted to know like what I did wrong so I could.
Okay. I haven't put I'd saved all the comments. Hadn't put them in yet. Let me discussion board notes. All right. So the biggest sort of knock, you made a comment that the equipment was faulty, right? But if you're going to make a comment like that, like if you're going to make a claim that whatever, and I don't remember yours exactly, but whatever company you said, did something to somebody's land, if you're going to make a claim that they used faulty equipment, like you had better be able to back that up. Right, because that would actually be considered sort of liable or slander, depending on whether or not it was spoken or written. And I mean, to say like you could make the comment that they were uncompassionate, and you don't really need to back that up because that's an opinion, right? But to say that that they had faulty equipment that would be dangerous is just a little bit different. And so it's sort of a function of word choice and how that played out.
Okay.
All right, but those are small enough. That's a small enough portion of your grade that it's not that one thing is not going to make a difference.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Have a good day.
You. Bye.